In the land where winter never sleeps, time moves differently. Empires rise and crumble, yet the land endures. This is Russia, a realm forged in ice and fire, in poetry and pain, in blood and belief. For 1,000 years this land has wrestled with destiny, between East and West, freedom and fear, faith and firepower. Each era, a heartbeat of chaos. Each ruler, a shadow cast long across the centuries. The Mongol horde's thunder, Ivan's burning eyes beneath his crown, Napoleon's frozen army swallowed by snow, Lenin's trembling voice in the storm of 1917, Stalin's ghostly silhouette behind the red curtain, Gorbachev's weary sigh as walls crumble, Putin's cold gaze under modern lights. But behind every war, every revolution, every promise of glory, lies one unbreakable truth. Russia is not a place. It is a force. It survives everything, even itself. This is the untold story of Russia. From forests to empires, from revolution to resurrection, 1,000 years of struggle, faith, and survival. A history written not in ink, but in ice, blood, and fire. Before Russia had a name, it had a heartbeat. The first settlers came long before history learned to write their names. Slavic tribes scattered across endless land. They built wooden homes near rivers, where fish were plenty, and the soil was kind. They prayed to the sun, the thunder, the forests, gods born from survival. Their world was vast, but fragile, a mosaic of tribes with no king, no empire, only the rhythm of the seasons and the constant fear of raids from the north and east. Then came the strangers, men with iron in their hands and salt in their veins. The Varangians, Norse traders and warriors, sailing their long ships down the rivers that would one day form Russia's veins, the Dnieper, the Volga, the Neva. They sought trade, plunder, and power. To some, they were invaders. To others, saviors. Legend tells of a moment, half history, half myth, when the tribes, weary of fighting, turned to one of these Varangians for peace. "Our land is vast and rich," they said, "but there is no order in it. Come and rule over us." His name was Rurik. And with that invitation, whether truth or legend, the seed of Russia was planted in the soil of the north. Rurik established his rule in Novgorod, a fortress of wood and frost. It was not an empire yet, only a promise, a gathering of tribes under one sword. But his death left a child too young to rule. Power passed to his kin, and one of them, Oleg of Novgorod, carried Rurik's vision forward. He looked south to the trade-rich city of Kiev, where the river Dnieper linked the Baltic to the Black Sea. To control that river was to control destiny. Oleg rode south with his warriors, seized Kiev, and made it the new heart of Rus. He nailed his shield to the city's gates, a gesture not of conquest, but of permanence. Let this be the mother of all Russian cities. Thus was born Kievan Rus around the year 882, the first true state in the lands that would become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. But what Oleg built was not yet a nation. It was a living experiment, a blend of Slavic roots and Norse order, pagan gods and trading ambitions. For the first time, the tribes looked beyond mere survival and began to dream of legacy. Through the rivers flowed silk from the east, silver from the west, and ideas, dangerous ideas. As Byzantine merchants and priests came north, they brought not only goods, but faith, the promise of one God, one truth, one light in the endless northern dark. The rulers of Rus were curious, but cautious. Paganism was their power, Christianity their temptation. Then came Prince Vladimir, a man whose choice would change the soul of the land forever. Born in blood, raised in rivalry, Vladimir was not destined for peace. He seized power in 980 after a brutal struggle among brothers. Pagan gods watched from wooden idols as he sacrificed for favor, chasing the old faith's blessings through war and pleasure. But power brought emptiness, and Vladimir began to search for meaning beyond the gods of his ancestors. He sent envoys across the world, to the Volga Bulgars, to the Germans, to the mighty Byzantines, to study their faiths. They returned with stories. "We saw the Greeks worship in their church. one envoy said, "and we knew there is no such beauty anywhere on earth. We did not know whether we were in heaven or on earth." In 988, Vladimir made his choice. He embraced Christianity, baptized in the waters of Chersonesus, and ordered all of Kiev to follow. Pagan idols were thrown into the river. The bells of the new faith rang over the city, and in that moment, Kievan Rus was reborn, not just as a kingdom, but as a civilization. The faith of Byzantium gave the Slavs a script, an art, a vision, but also bound them spiritually to the east, to Constantinople. This was the first of many crossroads for Russia, torn between east and west, empire and faith, freedom and order. A land baptized in water, but destined to bleed in fire. As the Dnieper carried the idols away, a new destiny began to flow through the veins of Rus, one that would outlast kings, conquerors, and centuries. In that river, beneath that gray sky, the soul of Rus was baptized, but not yet at peace. Prince Vladimir, now called the Great, turned his capital into a beacon of the new faith. Churches rose where shrines once stood. Stone replaced wood. Icons replaced idols. Slowly, a new rhythm began, a merging of pagan heart and Christian soul. Yet even as cathedrals glimmered with Byzantine gold, the forest whispered of the old gods. The people had changed their prayers, but not their fears. For centuries, the two worlds, ancient and divine, would live side by side in quiet tension. Kiev flourished under Vladimir's hand. Trade blossomed, scholars came from the south, and the princes of Rus ruled with growing confidence. His son, Yaroslav the Wise, brought law and learning. He built the magnificent St. Sophia Cathedral, its domes shimmering like suns above the city. Under him, Kievan Rus reached its golden age, a land of art, commerce, and order. For a brief moment in the river of time, Rus knew peace. But peace, in this land, never lasts. After Yaroslav's death, his sons quarreled over inheritance. Brothers turned on brothers. The unity that had taken centuries to build began to splinter. The rivers that once carried trade now carried armies. Each prince wanted to be the ruler of Kiev, the mother of cities, and in their ambition, they shattered their own creation. The dream of one Rus faded into the noise of many. By the 12th century, Kievan Rus was no longer a single realm, but a constellation of rival principalities. Novgorod, Vladimir Suzdal, Smolensk, Rostov, and many more. Each had its own prince, its own army, its own destiny. The rivers still bound them together, but their hearts drifted apart. And beyond the forests, far to the east, a new power was rising, unseen, unstoppable, like a storm over the steppe. While princes feasted in wooden halls, 1,000 hooves began to thunder in the distance. The Mongols were coming. They moved like a plague, silent, swift, merciless. Whole nations had already fallen before their advance. The princes of Rus heard whispers of fire from the east, but believed their forests would protect them. They were wrong. In 1223, near the Kalka River, they met the Mongols for the first time. The princes united briefly, fighting side by side, a rare moment of unity born of desperation. But the Mongols fought like no enemy they had ever faced. Their arrows darkened the sky, their tactics confused even seasoned warriors. The Rus army was crushed. The survivors limped home, humiliated. Few understood what had truly arrived. Not a raid, but the shadow of conquest. 2 decades later, the storm returned. This time, it did not pass. In 1237, Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, rode west with his armies. City after city fell: Ryazan, Vladimir, Suzdal, and finally in 1240, Kiev itself. The great mother city burned for days. Churches collapsed, bells melted, the Dnieper ran red. The city that had been baptized in light was now drowned in fire. The Mongol invasion was not just a war. It was an erasure. The princes fled, the people were enslaved, and the land fell silent. The once golden Rus became a shattered memory beneath the hooves of the Golden Horde. For over 2 centuries, the Mongols ruled from afar. They demanded tribute, loyalty, and silence. Russian princes became vassals, kneeling to foreign khans. Yet beneath that humiliation, something survived, a stubborn will. a silent endurance that would one day rise again. In the ashes of Kiev, a new center began to grow. Small, hidden, determined. A city surrounded by forests, protected by rivers, waiting for its time. Its name was Moscow. From the bones of one empire, another began to breathe. The Mongols had crushed the body of Rus, but in doing so, they had unknowingly forged its soul. The land had learned patience. The people had learned endurance. And Moscow, small, loyal, silent, was learning power. Empires die in a day. Nations are born in centuries. The Mongols ruled with iron and distance. They did not occupy every village or city. They ruled through fear, tribute, and obedience. The princes of Rus were allowed to govern their lands so long as they paid in gold and silence. Any who disobeyed were crushed without mercy. And so began the Age of Shadows, 200 years of submission and survival. The princes bowed, but in their hearts they waited. The people prayed, whispered, and endured. Faith became their fortress. Amid this darkness, one city began to rise, not by rebellion, but by cunning. Moscow. It began as nothing, a wooden fortress on the Moskva River, surrounded by forests and fog. Yet its princes were shrewd. They served the Mongols loyally, paid their tribute early, and watched their rivals fall. Slowly, the Khans began to favor them, granting privileges, lands, and titles. Ivan Thursh of Moscow, called Kalita, the money bag, understood the art of survival. He collected taxes for the Khan, grew rich, and used that wealth to buy loyalty. When rival cities rebelled and burned, Moscow remained untouched. When others fought for freedom, Moscow gathered strength. In silence and obedience, the city built its throne. By the 14th century, Moscow had become more than a city. It was a sanctuary. Churches flourished, trade routes converged, and refugees from destroyed towns found safety behind its walls. Even the metropolitan of the Russian Orthodox Church moved there, making Moscow not just the political, but the spiritual heart of the land. Faith had found a new home, and faith in Russia is never powerless. But freedom has a way of calling, even to the patient. As the Mongol grip weakened, a generation of princes began to dream of liberation. Among them stood one name that history would not forget, Dmitry Donskoy. He was young, untested, but bold. The Mongols demanded more tribute than ever before, and Dmitry refused. His defiance was not madness. It was timing. The horde was fracturing, its strength fading. For the first time in 2 centuries, the wind of fate shifted. In 1380, the armies of Rus gathered on the fields of Kulikovo. Under the sign of the cross and the shadow of their ancestors, they stood, farmers, nobles, monks, warriors, united not by politics, but by faith and memory. The battle that followed was not merely a clash of steel, it was the rebirth of a nation's soul. They had lived as subjects for generations, and now, for one day, they fought as brothers. The ground shook beneath the hooves of Mongol cavalry. Arrows fell like rain. But Dmitry's men held their line. At the height of battle, when defeat seemed certain, the hidden reserves of Rus surged from the forest, led by the monk warrior Peresvet, who had prayed and fought in equal measure. When the dust cleared, the horde was broken. The Mongols had lost, not their empire, but their fearlessness. Dmitry knelt on the blood-soaked earth, his armor torn, his face streaked with mud and tears. He had no crown, no empire, but something greater. A people had remembered who they were. Though the Mongols would return years later to raid again, their spell was broken. The victory at Kulikovo was more than a battle. It was a prophecy. It told the world that Russia, though enslaved, could not be erased. In the decades that followed, Moscow's rise became unstoppable. The princes no longer saw themselves as servants, but as heirs, heirs to Kiev, to Rus, to destiny. The Mongol yoke weakened further, torn by internal strife. By the late 15th century, the waiting ended. A new ruler ascended the throne of Moscow, one who would cast off the chains of the past and forge an empire of his own. Ivan III, known as Ivan the Great. He refused to pay tribute to the horde. When the Mongols marched to enforce their rule, the two armies met across the Ugra River in 1480. For days they faced each other, neither side daring to cross. Then, silently, the Mongols withdrew. No arrows, no blood, no fire, but the yoke was broken. After 200 years of silence, the land finally exhaled. From the ashes of Rus rose something new, not Kievan, not Mongol, but Russian. And at its heart stood Moscow, proud, patient, unyielding. The forests had whispered for centuries. Now they roared. The chains had fallen, but freedom was not peace. Freedom was a test. It was the year 1480. The Mongols had turned back from the Ugra River, and with their retreat, a chapter of humiliation closed. Yet what came next was not calm. It was transformation. The prince who had defied the horde, Ivan III, became more than a ruler. He became the architect of a new destiny. Ivan looked upon Moscow and saw more than a city. He saw the seed of an empire. Under his command, wooden fortresses were rebuilt in white stone. The Kremlin, once a modest citadel, rose in splendor, its towers glinting like iron against the sky. Foreign architects from Italy and Byzantium were summoned to carve Moscow's face into permanence. The wooden dream became a fortress of stone. The whisper of survival became a roar of ambition. Ivan married Sophia Paleologina, the niece of the last Byzantine emperor. Through her, he inherited the symbols and ceremony of the fallen Eastern Empire, the double-headed eagle, the sacred vision of divine kingship. From this union, an idea took root, one that would echo for centuries. If Rome fell and Constantinople fell, then Moscow shall be the third Rome, and there shall be no fourth. This belief would become Russia's holy armor, the conviction that it alone stood as the guardian of the true faith, the last light against the world's darkness. But with destiny came danger. To forge a single nation from scattered lands, Ivan turned his sword inward. He crushed the proud princes who still clung to their independence. Tver, Novgorod, Ryazan. Novgorod, ancient and free, dared to resist. Its people had lived by trade and law, not by monarchy. But Ivan had no room for equals. The city's bells were taken down, its veshe, the people's council, silenced forever, its wealth stripped and sent to Moscow. The freedom of one city was sacrificed for the unity of a nation. The river that once carried Viking sails now carried Moscow's banners. One by one, the fragments of Rus were drawn into Ivan's domain. A new title was born. Tsar, derived from Caesar, the ruler of a realm both temporal and divine. Russia had found its crown. But what Ivan built through ambition, his grandson would rule through fear. When Ivan the Refort was born in 1530, the bells tolled again, this time for destiny's darkest child. History would name him Ivan the Terrible. His childhood was shaped by chaos, orphaned young, surrounded by scheming nobles, betrayed by those meant to guide him. He watched power from the shadows and learned its cruelty before he could speak its name. When he finally took the throne, he vowed never to be powerless again. At 16, he crowned himself Tsar of all Russia, the first ruler to do so. And from that day, his reign became both creation and catastrophe. Under Ivan's command, Russia expanded eastward, beyond the Ural Mountains, into the vast unknown of Siberia. Kazan and Astrakhan, the last strongholds of the Tatar Khanates, fell before his armies. The Mongol shadow was gone, and for the first time, Russia stretched from Europe into Asia. The boy who had lived in fear became the man who made the world fear him. He built churches to celebrate his victories, none more famous than the dazzling St. Basil's Cathedral, whose colorful domes still rise above Red Square like a dream carved in fire. But the victories did not soothe him. Within his mind, storms gathered, paranoia, grief, divine fury. He trusted no one, not even his own blood. When his beloved wife Anastasia died, Ivan's faith shattered. He saw poison and betrayal everywhere. To cleanse his realm, he created the Oprichnina, a personal army in black robes who rode black horses and carried severed dog heads as symbols of loyalty. They burned villages, slaughtered nobles, and drenched the land in terror. Russia trembled. He had freed his people from foreign masters, only to make himself their fear. Even his own son could not escape his wrath. In a fit of rage, Ivan struck the young prince with his staff, killing the heir he loved most. The blood of his dynasty spilled at his feet. The Tsar fell to his knees, sobbing beside the body. The bells tolled again, not for victory, not for faith, for tragedy. When Ivan died in 1584, the empire he forged stood vast, powerful, and broken. The boy who dreamed of glory had built a kingdom out of faith and fear, and left it haunted by both. Russia had become a giant, but its heart was cracked by its own crown. The giant had awakened, only to stumble into darkness. Even the terrible's death in 1584 left Russia trembling. His only surviving son, Fyodor, was gentle, pious, but weak. The empire that had stretched across 2 continents now rested on the shoulders of a man who preferred bells to battle, prayers to politics. Behind him, real power fell into the hands of his ambitious brother-in-law, Boris Godunov. At first, Boris ruled wisely. He strengthened the army, opened trade routes, built cities, and dreamed of bringing learning to the frozen land. But peace in Russia is a fragile thing. It lasts only until hunger arrives. And hunger came. A famine struck in 1601, cold winds, failed harvests, empty granaries. The rivers froze early, and corpses filled the streets of Moscow. People whispered that God had turned his face away from the Tsar. When Fyodor died childless in 1598, the ancient dynasty of Rurik, born in the forests of Novgorod centuries before, came to an end. The line of Russia's first rulers was broken. The crown had no heir. And when the crown has no master, chaos always remembers its way home. Into that void stepped Boris Godunov, crowned as Tsar by the church, not by blood. The people murmured that his hands were unclean, that he had murdered Ivan's youngest son, Dmitri, to claim the throne. The story was never proven, but it spread like smoke through dry grass. Then came the shadow, a man claiming to be the dead prince himself. He called himself Dmitri, said he had escaped assassination as a boy, and now returned to reclaim what was rightfully his. The people, starved and desperate for a savior, believed him. The boyars, the nobles who hated Boris, supported him. And from the south, with Polish help, the false Dmitri marched toward Moscow. Boris Godunov died before the battle, perhaps from a stroke, perhaps from despair. When the impostor entered the capital, the bells rang again. Crowds cheered, believing a miracle had returned from the grave. But his rule was short, and his death brutal. The years that followed became a nightmare written in fire and famine. The time of troubles. Between 1605 and 1613, Russia tore itself apart. One false Dmitri followed another. Polish and Swedish armies invaded from the west. Cossacks rose in rebellion. The Kremlin itself was occupied by foreign soldiers. Moscow burned. The people starved. Mothers buried children in snow. It seemed as if the land was cursed to die by the same fire that had once forged it. Yet even in ruin, the Russian soul refused to break. In the villages and monasteries, priests and peasants began to whisper of salvation. From that whisper rose a movement, not of kings but of people. In 1612, 2 unlikely leaders emerged, Prince Dmitry Pozharsky and a merchant, Kuzma Minin. Together they rallied the people, not nobles, not armies, but farmers and townsfolk, to defend their homeland. With icons in one hand and swords in the other, they marched to Moscow. The city was in ashes, the Kremlin still held by Polish troops. The final battle raged through the streets, desperate, bloody, righteous. When it was over, the foreign soldiers were driven out, and the Russian tricolor rose above the walls once more. The people had saved what kings had lost. Out of that victory came a new beginning. In 1613, a young man was brought to the throne, humble, frightened, chosen by the will of the people and the church. His name was Mikhail Romanov. He was only 16, but from his coronation, a new dynasty was born, one that would rule Russia for more than 300 years. The Romanovs rebuilt what chaos had consumed. They restored order, faith, and a fragile peace. But beneath that peace, the land still trembled, waiting for the next storm. Every empire is born twice, once in fire, once in memory. Russia had survived its first death. Now it would learn how to live. For the giant that had just learned to stand was about to learn how to conquer. The land had survived the storm. But peace in Russia is never the end of war, only its pause. It is 1613, and the boy Mikhail Romanov has taken the throne. The land around him is broken. Villages burned, cities hollowed, rivers filled with the ashes of famine and rebellion. Yet the people look to him as a symbol of rebirth, a chosen heir of divine mercy after years of suffering. He is young, uncertain, guided by his father, Patriarch Filaret, a man of iron faith and political instinct. Together they rebuild what was lost. Slowly, order returns. The Polish invaders are gone, the peasantry settles back into the rhythm of the soil, and the church rises again as the soul of the people. But though the wounds of war begin to close, a darker truth festers beneath. Freedom is not equality. The peasants who had fought to save their homeland now find themselves bound once more, this time not by foreign chains, but by law. The land that was saved by the people was rebuilt on their backs. The serfdom system expands, locking peasants to the estates of nobles. A man's life becomes property, inherited, traded, sold. In the name of order, freedom is silenced. The peasants plow and pray, while the boyars feast and rule. The Romanovs, in their youth, cannot yet see what they are planting, a seed of rebellion that will one day split the empire apart. Still, the century moves forward. Russia grows, outward, always outward. The frontier calls, vast and wild, stretching beyond the horizon of the known world. From the forests and fields ride men of rough hands and wilder hearts, the Cossacks. They are outcasts, wanderers, warriors of the steppe. To some, bandits. To others, heroes. They live on the edge of empire, between freedom and chaos, loyal to no master but the wind. It is they who lead the charge eastward. Beyond the Urals lies Siberia, a land of ice and silence, rich with furs, rivers, and untouched promise. The Tsar sends explorers, traders, and soldiers to claim it in his name. They build forts along the great rivers, Tobolsk, Irkutsk, Yakutsk, each one a spark in the frozen dark. The fur trade becomes Russia's lifeblood, feeding the coffers of Moscow and financing the dream of empire. While Europe chased gold across oceans, Russia carved its fortune through ice. By the mid-1600s, the empire stretches thousands of miles eastward, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It is a silent conquest, not of kingdoms, but of wilderness. Yet in every log fort and snow-covered outpost, the Russian soul expands, patient, enduring, eternal. But even as the East submits, the West stirs with unrest. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Ottoman Empire, and Sweden all watch Moscow's rise with wary eyes. Wars flare like sparks along the borders, fought not just for land, but for faith. The 17th century becomes a crucible. Russia fights the Poles to reclaim the lands of ancient Rus, Smolensk, Kiev, the Dnieper. Each battle is both conquest and memory, an attempt to resurrect the lost unity of the past. At home, however, unity is fragile. Rebellion brews among the peasants, led by men who become legends. Stepan Razin, a Cossack leader, rises in 1670, preaching freedom from noble and Tsar alike. His army of peasants and outcasts sweeps across the Volga, capturing cities, burning estates, and crying out against injustice. For a moment, it seems the old order will crumble. But Moscow answers with fury. Razin is captured, brought in chains to the capital, and executed in the square before the people. His body is broken, but his cry for freedom lingers like thunder beyond the grave. The empire learned to fear the people learned to endure the empire. By the dawn of the 18th century, the Romanovs have weathered a century of storms. Their power is firm, their church is strong, their empire vast, but their spirit, still trapped between fear and destiny, awaits one man who will break every wall between Russia and the world. A new Tsar was coming, a storm in human form. His name was Peter. The sun rises over Moscow, but this dawn is different. It carries the heat of ambition, the smell of iron, the rhythm of change. From the ashes of old Russia rises Peter Alexeyevich Romanov, a giant among men, restless, curious, relentless. He is not born for stillness. He dreams of oceans while trapped in a landlocked empire. He hears the hum of machines, the clash of muskets, the whisper of progress beyond Russia's borders, and he hungers for it. He was the storm Russia never expected, and the one it could no longer live without. Peter is crowned Tsar in 1682, but he soon learns that the crown is not power, it is burden. The old boyars cling to tradition. The Orthodox Church resists every breath of change. The world beyond Russia moves with ships and science, while Moscow remains bound in superstition and fear. He will change that. He must. At first he watches, learns, travels. Disguised as a common man, he walks the shipyards of Amsterdam, studies the navy of England, learns the art of cannon and compass, rope and sail. He returns not as a dreamer, but as a builder of empires. To rule Russia, he would rebuild Russia. The transformation begins brutally. He shaves the beards of nobles, symbols of piety turned to relics. He commands them to wear Western clothes, to learn Western sciences, to think like Europe. The court is torn between outrage and awe. Those who resist, he crushes without hesitation. Those who obey, he raises higher than they ever dreamed. He builds St. Petersburg, a city carved from swamps, bathed in blood and glory. Tens of thousands die building it, freezing in the northern marshes, but Peter will not stop. Let it stand, he says, as our window to Europe. And so it does, shining, modern, ruthless, a monument to vision and sacrifice. St. Petersburg becomes the new capital, a symbol of rebirth. Russia no longer faces inward toward her forests, but outward toward the sea. Yet every rise demands resistance. The Great Northern War begins. Sweden, the mightiest military power in the north, led by the young and brilliant Charles III. The two titans collide in a struggle for the Baltic, for the right to shape the north of Europe. At first Russia falters. Narva, 1700. The snow runs red as Swedish forces crush Peter's inexperienced army. But he does not yield. He rebuilds, reforms, retrains. Each defeat becomes a lesson, each retreat a step toward triumph. 9 years later, in 1709, the world watches Poltava, the battle that changes history. The Swedish army, exhausted and outnumbered, faces Peter's new, disciplined force. The cannons roar, muskets blaze, the steppe trembles. When the smoke clears, Sweden's empire is broken, and Russia's rises in its place. On the plains of Poltava, a new empire was born, baptized in fire, crowned with iron. Peter is no longer Tsar. He is emperor of all Russia, the first to bear the title, and the first to see his nation as part of the modern world. Under him, the navy sails on distant seas. Factories hum in Moscow. Schools, academies, and armies follow his will. But progress is never gentle. The people pay with sweat and blood. Peter's reforms reshape everything, but his empire remains chained to autocracy. He builds a modern state, yet rules with the same absolute hand as his forefathers. His triumph is magnificent, but his shadow immense. When Peter dies in 1725, the people are left between wonder and fear. The empire is stronger than ever, yet the heart of the people feels hollow. He gave Russia a face of iron, but behind it, the soul still wept. For the next century, the throne becomes a theater of intrigue and ambition. Tsars and empresses rise and fall, often by poison, blade, or secret plot. Russia's crown becomes a weapon, and the empire, an endless chessboard. But among them will come one ruler who burns brighter than the rest, a woman not born of Russia, but destined to shape it forever. Her name will echo in every palace and revolution to come. Catherine the Great. Wind sweeps across the Neva River. The palaces glitter like ice under a pale northern sun. Russia stands taller than ever, but beneath the gold and marble, power whispers in the dark. An empire ruled by men would soon kneel before a woman, not by force, but by brilliance. When Peter the Great dies, he leaves no clear heir, only chaos. The throne passes like a ghost from one hand to another. Empress to Tsar, Tsar to coup, coup to silence. For decades, Russia trembles under uncertainty. The empire Peter forged is mighty, but unstable, too vast for weak hands, too new for old minds. And then, out of this storm, she arrives. Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, a minor German princess, barely 17, with nothing but intelligence and fire in her eyes. She is brought to Russia to marry the future Tsar Peter III, a man more fascinated by toy soldiers than by power. But Sophie is not content to be a wife. She studies Russian language, history, politics, and faith. She converts, renames herself Catherine, and begins to weave a quiet web of loyalty around her. She came as a stranger. She would leave as a legend. When her husband ascends the throne, his reign is brief and chaotic. He alienates the army, the nobility, the church, everyone who matters. Within months, Catherine strikes. Supported by the imperial guard and key nobles, she stages a coup. Her husband flees. Days later, he is dead, murdered under mysterious circumstances. The throne is hers. The world gasps. In 1762, Catherine II becomes Empress of all Russia. At first, Europe expects her to fail, a foreigner, a woman, an outsider. But Catherine rules with an intellect sharper than any sword. She expands the empire's borders, reforms the administration, and opens the door to the Enlightenment. She corresponds with philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot, seeing herself as both monarch and reformer, a bringer of light to a land of shadows. Under her, Russia becomes a true empire of Europe, its culture refined, its power feared, its monarch adored. She wore crowns like armor and ruled with the calm of destiny. Her armies marched south against the Ottoman Empire, conquering vast territories along the Black Sea. She dreams of reclaiming Constantinople, the lost jewel of Eastern Christendom. Under her command, generals like Suvorov and Potemkin carve victory after victory, pushing Russia's borders ever outward. The map of Europe trembles as Russia rises, yet even as her empire flourishes, darkness coils beneath. The wealth of the court grows infinite, but the peasants live in chains. Serfdom, the quiet horror of the countryside, deepens. Peasants are property, bodies owned by landowners, sold with estates, punished without mercy. Catherine sees the injustice, rights of reform, but she cannot risk the nobility's wrath. So the system endures, and the people's silence cracks. In 1773, the land erupts in rebellion, led by a man who calls himself Yemelyan Pugachev, claiming to be the murdered Tsar. Peter III returned to reclaim his throne. His army of peasants, Cossacks, and outlaws sweeps across the steppe, seizing cities, slaughtering nobles, declaring freedom for all. For a moment, it seems the empire will burn. But Catherine's generals strike back with fury. Pugachev is captured, paraded through Moscow, and executed. His rebellion dies, but its echo lingers deep in the Russian heart. Every drop of peasant blood became a silent promise that one day the earth would remember. Even as she quells rebellion, Catherine dreams grander dreams of art, knowledge, and empire. She builds schools, museums, and theaters. She founds new cities, Odessa, Sevastopol, Yekaterinoslav. The Hermitage Museum grows from her private collection, jewels of Europe shining in a land that once knew only snow and sorrow. By the end of her reign, Russia is vast, stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea, from Poland to the Pacific. The world calls her Catherine the Great, and she earns the name. But her greatness has a cost. The empire she leaves behind is powerful, yet brittle, glittering on the surface, hollow within. The nobility grow rich, the peasants restless, the army vast and proud. It is a kingdom of iron on a foundation of snow. She gave Russia glory, but in her shadow a storm was waiting, one that no ruler could stop. The golden age of Catherine fades into twilight. The palaces still gleam, the rivers still shine, but the light feels colder now, thinner, stretched across too many shadows. Every empire that rises in brilliance must face the dusk of its own creation. The 19th century dawns, and Russia, immense, proud, untamed, stands at a crossroads between two worlds. The West hums with revolution, invention, and the cries of liberty. The East, her endless frontier, still whispers the old prayers of survival. Catherine's empire passes to her son, Paul I, a ruler obsessed with order and vengeance. He reverses his mother's policies, alienates the nobility, and trusts no one, not even his family. In 1801, his paranoia ends the only way it could. Assassins in his bedroom, a silent struggle, a candle flickering out. His son, Alexander I, ascends the throne, young, thoughtful, torn between the idealism of the Enlightenment and the iron weight of Russian autocracy. He dreams of reform, of freedom, of peace. But destiny has other plans. When the winds of Europe turn to war, even dreamers must wear armor. Far to the west, a storm is brewing. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of France, conqueror of kings. His armies sweep across Europe like wildfire, toppling crowns and rewriting nations. Soon, his gaze turns eastward, toward the one empire that will not bow. In 1812, Napoleon invades Russia with the greatest army Europe has ever seen. Over 600,000 men, from every corner of his empire. He expects a swift victory. Instead, he meets the Russian soul. Alexander orders a retreat, not of cowardice, but of strategy. The Russian army falls back, burning everything in its path. Fields, villages, food, all turn to ash. The invaders march deeper, chasing ghosts through smoke and ruin. The land itself became the army. At Borodino, west of Moscow, the two giants clash. Cannons thunder, horses scream, the ground quakes with death. It is one of the bloodiest days in human history. Neither side truly wins, but Napoleon continues on into the heart of Russia. When he reaches Moscow, the city is silent, abandoned, burning. Flames devour the ancient capital as snow begins to fall. Napoleon waits for surrender. None comes. Winter descends, merciless, infinite. The same cold that forged Russia now became her sword. The French army starves, freezes, collapses. From the ashes of Moscow, the empire of fire turns to ice. By the time Napoleon retreats, only a fraction of his men survive. Russia, battered, bleeding, has triumphed. Alexander rides into Europe as a savior, hailed as the conqueror of Napoleon. But triumph carries its own poison. The victory feeds pride, and pride feeds tyranny. Russia returns home stronger, yet chained once again to autocracy and fear. In the decades that follow, reform flickers and fades. The empire grows richer in land, poorer in mercy. The nobles live in luxury, the peasants remain bound to the soil. Still whispers rise, among soldiers, poets, thinkers, of freedom, of justice, of a Russia reborn. In 1825, as Alexander dies, a group of young officers refuse to swear loyalty to his successor, Nicholas I. They gather in the snow-covered Senate Square of St. Petersburg, raising banners of liberty. They are the Decembrists, the first modern revolutionaries of Russia. But the Tsar's cannons answer their cries. Smoke, gunfire, silence. The rebellion is crushed. Its leaders are executed or exiled to Siberia. Their blood froze into the snow, but their dream did not die. Nicholas I rules with iron certainty. He builds a vast bureaucracy, a secret police, a machine of obedience. He censors words, controls thought, and crushes dissent. To the world, Russia is mighty, the gendarme of Europe. But beneath the surface, the empire trembles. The peasant's misery deepens. The gap between palace and village becomes a chasm. Writers like Pushkin, Lermontov, Gogol, they begin to speak of it, cloaking truth in poetry, pain in art. And as the 19th century rolls onward, the world changes faster than Russia can follow. Steam engines roar in England. Factories rise in Germany. But in Russia, time still moves to the rhythm of the plow. The empire was vast enough to contain eternity, and too slow to escape its own past. As Nicholas's rule nears its end, his empire stands proud, beautiful, and doomed. A volcano sleeps beneath the snow, waiting for the next spark. Snow drifts quietly over St. Petersburg once more. The palaces still glow with candlelight, the orchestras still play, and the nobility still dance, unaware that beneath the marble floors, the ground itself is beginning to crack. An empire built on silence cannot last forever. Beneath the hymns of loyalty, a storm was gathering. It is the mid-19th century. Russia stands triumphant but hollow. The army that humbled Napoleon now stumbles into humiliation. In 1853, Russia wages war against a coalition of Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire, the Crimean War. It is a disaster. Outdated weapons, corruption, and arrogance cripple the might of the Tsars' army. When the cannons fall silent in 1856, Russia's pride lies in ruins. Tsar Nicholas I dies, perhaps of grief, perhaps of shame, and the throne passes to his son, Alexander II. But this new ruler carries a different fire. He is called the Tsar Liberator. For the first time in centuries, a Romanov dares to break the oldest chain of all. In 1861, he signs the Emancipation Edict, freeing over 20 million serfs. Across the empire, church bells ring. Peasants weep. Landowners rage. And though the freedom they receive is tangled in debt and compromise, the meaning is eternal. After 1,000 years of bondage, the soil itself took its first breath of liberty. Yet even liberation carries its shadow. The freed peasants are still bound to poverty. The nobles lose power but keep privilege. The dream of equality dissolves into frustration, and frustration breeds fury. The age of revolution begins to flicker. Universities fill with restless minds. Writers, thinkers, and radicals begin to ask forbidden questions. Why should one man rule millions? Why must freedom come only through blood? Among them rise new voices: Herzen, Bakunin, Chernyshevsky, the prophets of rebellion. Their words spread like fire among the young. Alexander II tries to reform, to balance mercy with order. But mercy is never enough for those who dream of justice. Radicals turn to violence. In 1881, as his carriage rolls through the streets of St. Petersburg, a bomb explodes. Smoke, screams. The Tsar who freed the serfs dies on the cobblestones, torn apart by the very hope he unleashed. He gave them freedom. They gave him fire. His son, Alexander III, learns a brutal lesson. He abandons reform, rules through fear, strengthens the police, and silences dissent. Russia becomes a fortress, strong, unyielding, suffocating. But history does not sleep. In 1894, a new Tsar ascends, Nicholas II, gentle, devout, and tragically unprepared. He believes in divine right, in the holiness of the crown. But the world has changed beyond belief. Factories rise, cities swell. Workers crowd into slums, whispering words like equality, rights, revolution. Marxist ideas cross the borders, merging with Russia's ancient hunger for justice. Meanwhile, Nicholas surrounds himself with luxury and mysticism. In his palace, a strange figure enters the royal circle: Grigory Rasputin, a wandering mystic, healer, and enigma. To the Tsarina, he is a savior. To the court, a devil. His influence spreads like shadow, and the empire begins to rot from within. In 1904, Russia enters another war, this time against Japan. It is supposed to be a quick victory. Instead, it becomes another humiliation. The navy is destroyed, the army collapses, and the people's faith in the Tsar begins to shatter. Then comes 1905. Winter. A peaceful march in St. Petersburg. Men, women, children, carrying icons and prayers, pleading for justice. The soldiers open fire. Hundreds die in the snow. The blood of the innocent froze into the heart of the empire. It is called Bloody Sunday, and from that day, the people's faith in the Tsar dies forever. Strikes erupt, mutinies spread. The Tsar grants a parliament, the Duma, but clings to power all the same. The cracks deepen. By 1914, when Europe plunges into World War I, Russia is already trembling. The war drains the nation's blood. Millions die in trenches. Famine, poverty, and despair devour the land. In 1917, the final wall breaks. The soldiers turn their guns not on the enemy, but on their own government. The people pour into the streets of Petrograd. The centuries-old throne of the Romanovs collapses. After 300 years of rule, The crown fell, and the people rose. Nicholas II abdicates. The empire is dead. The revolution has begun. And in the silence that follows, one question echoes across the frozen land. What comes after the fall of a god? Snow falls again. But this time it does not bring peace. It falls upon a world collapsing under the weight of its own past. For centuries, the Russian people had knelt before the throne. Now they rose, not for a czar, not for a savior, but for an idea. It is 1917. The Great War has torn the empire apart. Millions of Russian soldiers lie dead or vanished on foreign fields. Cities starve. Factories shut down. Mothers bury sons and curse the silence of the palaces. In Petrograd, the capital of revolution, the streets boil with hunger and rage. Bread lines stretch for miles. The winter wind howls through broken windows. The army, once the Tsar's shield, begins to disobey. On February 23rd, women march through the streets, shouting for food. By March, the workers join them, then the soldiers. Within days, the protest becomes an uprising. The throne trembles, and then it falls. Nicholas II abdicates. The Romanov dynasty, the empire of Peter, Catherine, and centuries of autocrats, ends in a single signature. After 300 years of divine right, the crown fell to dust, and the people stood in the ashes, unsure what freedom meant. In the vacuum of power rises a fragile hope, the provisional government. Led by liberal reformers, it promises democracy, equality, peace. But the people are too hungry to wait, the soldiers too weary to obey. And in the shadows, a new force stirs, silent, disciplined, burning with purpose. From exile in Switzerland, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, known to the world as Lenin, watches the chaos unfold. For years, he has dreamed of this moment. A revolution, not of nobles or generals, but of workers and peasants. A revolution that would erase the old world entirely. He boards a sealed train through Germany, rides across a continent at war, and arrives in Petrograd like a ghost returning home. When he steps onto the platform at Finland Station, the crowd roars. Though many do not yet know his name, Lenin speaks. No support for the provisional government. All power to the Soviets. The words strike like thunder. To the starving, they sound like salvation. To the rulers, like madness. But they carry a truth that cannot be silenced. The people no longer want compromise. They want control. Summer comes, and with it chaos. The provisional government struggles to lead. The war continues. Soldiers desert by the thousands. Factories grind to a halt. Each speech, each promise, each delay, another step toward collapse. In the streets, armed workers form militias, the Red Guards. Their banners bear a single symbol, the hammer and the sickle, the union of labor and land. Meanwhile, within the palace walls, fear grows. The ministers debate, argue, and pray. But outside, the revolution has already chosen its direction. By October 1917, the final act begins. Lenin returns from hiding, his face gaunt, his voice fierce. He writes, speaks, commands. The time is now. In the cold, dark hours before dawn, the Bolsheviks move. They seize bridges, railways, telegraphs, each captured silently, with precision and purpose. At last, they turn toward the heart of power, the Winter Palace. Inside, the provisional government sits in despair, unaware that history is already outside their gates. Night falls. A signal flare arcs across the sky. The cruiser Aurora, anchored in the Neva, fires a single blank shell. The sound echoes through eternity. One gun, one night, the birth cry of a new world. The Red Guards storm the palace. There is little blood, only confusion, shouts, and the sound of boots on marble. By morning, the ministers are arrested. The government is gone. Lenin walks into the Smolny Institute and declares to the world, "We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order." The Russian Empire is no more. In its place stands the world's first communist state, a nation born not of kings but of ideas. But revolutions do not end when the palaces fall. They only begin. The Tsar was dead, the empire shattered, but the war for Russia's soul had just begun. Silence never lasts long in revolutions. After the fall of the Winter Palace, the gunfire begins again, not between Tsar and people, but Russian against Russian. The Bolsheviks now hold the capital, but not the country. Across the vast empire, from the snows of Siberia to the fields of Ukraine, generals, nobles, peasants, and foreign armies gather against them. The revolution has shattered the crown, but left 1,000 blades behind. What happens when a nation cuts off its own head? For a moment there is freedom, and then there is blood. The Russian Civil War begins. On one side, the Reds, soldiers of the revolution, defenders of Lenin's new world. On the other, the Whites, a desperate alliance of monarchists, liberals, and officers longing for the old order. And beyond them, silent shadows from the West, the armies of Britain, France, Japan, and America, each landing on Russian shores under the banner of intervention, but driven by fear. Fear that this red flame could spread across the world. The land becomes a battlefield without end. Cities burn, villages starve. Trains carry soldiers, refugees, and corpses across the same frozen tracks. Brothers face brothers, sons face fathers, each believing themselves the savior of Russia. And amid the chaos, a quieter tragedy unfolds, deep within the Ural Mountains, in the town of Yekaterinburg. There, in a modest house renamed the House of Special Purpose, the last Tsar of Russia and his family live as prisoners. Nicholas II, no longer an emperor, only a man in exile with his wife Alexandra and their 5 children. They write letters, pray, and wait. For what? No one knows. Until one night, July 17, 1918. The guards wake them. They are told to dress quickly, to gather in the basement for safety. The family stands together, Nicholas holding Alexei's hand. A single light flickers. Then the sound of boots. The door opens. An officer reads a short statement. Nicholas begins to reply, and the guns fire before he can finish. When it ends, Russia's royal blood seeps into the floorboards. The Romanovs had ruled for 3 centuries. Their end came in 30 seconds. An empire reduced to echoes in a cellar. Word of the execution spreads through Russia like a curse. For some it is justice, the final act of revolution. For others it is sacrilege. But the new regime has made its choice. The past must die so the future can live. The war grows darker. Lenin establishes the Cheka, the secret police, the sword and shield of the revolution. In cellars and prisons, enemies of the people vanish without trial. They call it the Red Terror, a campaign not just of war, but of fear. Revolution, Lenin once wrote, is not a dinner party. It is an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. And violence there is. The whites execute reds, the reds execute whites. Villages change hands so often that flags are raised and torn down in the same day. By 1920, famine stalks the land. Tens of millions starve. Children eat grass and bark. Entire towns disappear beneath the snow. Yet amid the suffering, a single truth remains. The Reds are winning. Their leader, Leon Trotsky, commands the newly formed Red Army with ruthless discipline. He travels the front in an armored train, delivering fiery speeches to troops who barely have boots, but march anyway, driven by belief, by hunger, by fear. "The future of the world," he shouts, "is being decided on our bayonets." And slowly, inch by inch, they push the whites back. The foreign armies retreat. The Tsarists flee east, over the ice, and into exile. By 1922, after 5 years of blood, the red banner flies over a broken land. The revolution has survived, but the country it saved is unrecognizable. Villages lie in ruins, churches are empty, graves outnumber houses. But in the ashes, a new name rises, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Lenin stands at its birth, frail, exhausted, triumphant. He speaks to a crowd of workers in Moscow's Red Square, his voice echoing through cold air. "We have conquered the old world. Now we must build the new." The people cheer, but behind the banners, behind the music and speeches, a shadow is already growing. silent, patient, watching. It wears the face of a man named Joseph Stalin. Moscow, 1922. The banners still flutter red in the wind, but the roar of revolution has grown quiet. The empire of the Tsars is gone, and in its place, a new world struggles to breathe. Lenin stands at its heart, his body frail but his will unbroken. He is no longer just a man. He is an idea given flesh, a prophet of a promised future that few yet understand. But even prophets grow old. And behind him, in the corridors of the Kremlin, ambition begins to whisper. Revolutions are not inherited. They are seized by those bold enough to reach for the flame, even if it burns their hands. Lenin falls ill, a stroke first, then another. His speech falters, his hand trembles, and into the silence steps Joseph Vissarionovich Djugashvili, a man the world will come to know by one name, Stalin. At first he is a shadow among giants, Trotsky the fiery general, Bukharin the thinker, Kamenev and Zinoviev, the old comrades of Lenin's struggle. But Stalin is different. He does not shout. He listens. He does not argue. He waits. And slowly, like ice spreading through cracks, he fills the spaces others leave behind. While Lenin lies confined, Stalin becomes General Secretary of the Communist Party, a title small enough to be ignored, yet powerful enough to control everything. Every file, every appointment, every whisper of loyalty passes through his hands, and with each stroke of his pen, the future bends a little more toward him. Lenin senses the danger too late. In his final writings, The Testament, he warns the party. Comrade Stalin is too rude, and I am not sure he can be trusted with unlimited power. But by the time those words reach the Politburo, Lenin is dying, and Stalin is already holding the reins. In January 1924, Lenin's heart stops. The father of the revolution is gone. Moscow mourns in black banners and red flowers. His body is embalmed, encased in glass, frozen forever in a shrine of ideology. The crowds weep, but among them, one man does not. Stalin stands at the head of the coffin, hand resting on the edge of the glass, his face solemn, unreadable. The prophet was dead, and the disciple would soon become God. After Lenin's death, the struggle begins, not of bullets, but of words, meetings, and betrayals. Trotsky, brilliant and defiant, calls for global revolution, but Stalin calls for socialism in one country. It is a simpler dream, easier to sell to a weary nation. Trotsky writes, argues, pleads, but the walls close in. One by one, his allies are isolated. By 1927, he is expelled from the party. By 1929, he is exiled from Russia itself. The revolution eats its own children, and now, Stalin rules alone. The new Soviet Union marches to his rhythm: steel, order, fear. Factories rise like fortresses. The countryside becomes a battlefield once more, as Stalin launches his first great war, not against foreign armies, but against his own people. He calls it collectivization, a campaign to seize farms, crush landlords, and feed the cities. But what follows is a storm of chaos. Peasants resist, crops burn. Millions are branded kulaks, enemies of the people, and sent to labor camps in Siberia. Famine follows, sweeping across Ukraine and the Volga. In villages, people dig for roots and bark. In fields, mothers bury children beside empty granaries. The revolution had promised bread for all. Instead, it gave graves without names. Yet the machine does not stop. It grows stronger, hungrier. By the early 1930s, the Soviet Union is transforming, from a wounded nation into an industrial giant, its smokestacks rising through the fog like iron trees. The world watches in awe and terror, and Stalin watches it all, his gaze cold, unblinking, a man remaking a country in his own image. But power, once taken, must always be defended, and Stalin's next war will be fought not with armies, but with fear. "The enemies are among us," he whispers. "They wear familiar faces. The Great Purge is coming." Moscow, 1936. The air is heavy, almost motionless. Beneath the grand marble halls of the Kremlin, fear has become the language of survival. Revolutions are born from courage, but they are kept alive by fear. Joseph Stalin now stands as the undisputed master of the Soviet Union. His portrait hangs in every factory, every classroom, every home. His name is whispered like a prayer and a warning. The man who once walked in Lenin's shadow has become the shadow itself, stretching across all of Russia. The party that once swore loyalty to the workers now swears loyalty to him, and those who do not vanish. The Great Purge begins. It starts quietly, with rumors, then arrests, then disappearances. Generals, poets, scientists, even revolutionaries who once fought beside Stalin, all accused of treason, espionage, sabotage. Most confess. Those who don't are made to. The trials are public. The guilt is predetermined. Cameras capture trembling men admitting to impossible crimes. Crowds shout for justice, unaware that justice no longer exists. The prisons overflow. The trains run east, day and night, filled with the condemned, to the Gulag, the vast network of labor camps stretching from the Arctic to the Pacific. Men build cities they will never live in. Women dig canals through frozen earth with their bare hands. Each stone, each bridge, each piece of Soviet glory has the weight of human suffering beneath it. The Soviet Union was rising, but its foundations were made of bones. In schools, children chanted, "Thank you, Comrade Stalin, for our happy childhood." But at night, that same child might wake to the sound of boots, a knock, and a father's name struck from the family register. One by one, old comrades vanished, their faces erased from photographs. Revolutions devour their children, but under Stalin, even their ghosts were hunted. Beyond the borders, another storm gathered as Hitler rose in Germany. In a move that shocked the world, the two tyrants signed a pact, dividing Eastern Europe like a map carved with a knife. It was a brief, tense calm. Two wolves in the same forest, each waiting for the other to sleep first. Then, in the summer of 1941, the silence shattered. The real war had begun. Dawn breaks over the western plains of the Soviet Union, and with it comes fire. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. 3 million German soldiers surge across a front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Tanks roar, bombs fall, cities vanish in smoke before the news can reach Moscow. For centuries, invaders had marched toward Russia. None had ever returned the same. The first weeks are catastrophe. Entire Soviet armies are encircled and destroyed. Planes burn on their runways. Villages crumble under the boots of the Wehrmacht. Millions are captured, or worse. Stalin, stunned, retreats into silence. For days he speaks to no one, as if the weight of his own empire has crushed the breath from his chest. Then, he reappears on the radio. His voice, calm but trembling, fills the nation. "Comrades, brothers and sisters, the enemy has come to our land, not for the first time, but this time the Russian people will not yield. The great patriotic war has begun. From the forests of Belarus to the ruins of Kiev, men and women fight not for Stalin, not even for the party, but for their homes, their families, their soil. Factories are dismantled and moved east beyond the Urals, rebuilt brick by brick to keep the war alive. Women forge shells and tanks as bombs fall around them. Children dig trenches. Priests bless soldiers with tears instead of holy water. Winter comes early that year, a brutal ally to the Russians. Snow blinds the German advance. Engines freeze, horses collapse, and in that white silence, the Soviets strike back. At Moscow they stand. At Stalingrad, they do not retreat. The battle becomes a nightmare. Street by street, floor by floor, every brick bought with blood. No step back. The order reads, "Not one." For months the city burns. Bodies freeze in the Volga. The sky turns black from smoke and crows. Yet still the red flag waves over the ruins. In February 1943, the German Sixth Army surrenders. The news spreads like thunder. All across the Union, people weep, laugh, and collapse in disbelief. A tide has turned. From that moment, the Red Army drives west, through snow and mud, through forests and rivers, past the graves of millions, toward the heart of Europe. By 1945, the journey ends in Berlin. The final battle is hell. Shells raining, cities burning, the ghosts of 20 million dead marching behind them. In the Reichstag, a soldier raises the red flag over the smoking ruins. The nightmare that began in 1941 is over. The Soviet Union has paid the highest price, but it has survived. It has won. Russia had once again defeated an empire, not by power alone, but by endurance, the oldest weapon it ever had. The victory transforms Stalin into more than a man. He becomes legend. The father of nations, the liberator of Europe. His image towers over parades in Red Square, his name carved into history beside Lenin's, and perhaps above it. But beneath the music of victory lies silence, the silence of graves stretching from Poland to the Pacific. 27 million Soviet lives swallowed by war. Yet Stalin's grip tightens. The soldiers who returned are heroes, and prisoners of fear all the same. The world outside is divided now, split between two suns, the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War begins not with explosions, but with stares across oceans and walls. The revolution had survived its greatest test, the narrator murmurs. But in surviving, it became something else, an empire once again. In the final years of his rule, Stalin drifts between triumph and paranoia. He sees betrayal in every shadow, plots where there are none. Old friends vanish, new enemies appear overnight. And then, one night in March 1953, the man who built a nation of iron falls silent in his own dacha. A stroke takes him. The guards are too afraid to enter. By dawn, Joseph Stalin, the cobbler's son from Georgia, the ruler of half the world, is dead. The red dawn that began in revolution now fades into twilight, and behind it lies a century of ashes and miracles, the story of a people who could be broken, but never conquered. When the tyrant dies, the silence is deafening, but what comes after is never peace. It is the echo of fear trying to learn how to breathe again. Moscow, 1953. The funeral of Joseph Stalin. Crowds stretch for miles, black coats and red flags merging in the snow. Women faint, men weep. The air smells of wax, smoke, and exhaustion. They come not only to mourn, but to see if the nightmare has truly ended. Behind the coffin stand the new leaders. Nikita Khrushchev, short, broad, with a farmer's bluntness and a survivor's eyes. Lavrenti Beria, head of the secret police, smiling too widely. Georgy Malenkov, polished, cautious, each man pretending loyalty, each one reaching for the power left behind. The crowd chants, "Glory to Stalin." But the faces of the men above the coffin tell another story. The age of one god is over. Now begins the war for his throne. Within months, the knives come out, quietly, bureaucratically, inevitably. Beria, once the most feared man in the USSR, is arrested, tried, and executed. His own guards pull the trigger. The shadow of terror fades, but only a little. Khrushchev rises, not through fear, but through charm, cunning, and timing. He promises a gentler world, a human face to socialism, and for a moment, the Soviet people believe him. Factories hum again, but not just for tanks and guns, for homes, for cars, for dreams. People smile in public again. Children laugh in classrooms instead of whispering in fear. It is not freedom, but it is a breath of air. In 1956, at a closed session of the party Congress, Khrushchev shocks the nation and the world. He denounces Stalin himself. "Comrades," he says, his voice trembling between courage and terror, "we must never again allow the cult of personality, the rule of one man above all." Gasps fill the hall. Even his allies stare in disbelief. No one has dared speak against the dead god. For days afterward, people cry in private, confused and afraid. Was everything they believed in a lie? But Khrushchev presses on. He frees thousands from labor camps. Books once banned return to shelves. Artists paint new visions. Writers whisper forbidden truths. The air itself feels lighter. They call it the thaw, a season of hope after decades of frost. And beyond Russia's borders, The thaw spreads like morning sunlight across a divided world, because while Moscow heals, the world itself has split in two. To the west, the United States; to the east, the Soviet Union. Two empires, two dreams, each believing itself the guardian of the future. Between them lies an invisible wall, the Iron Curtain. Winston Churchill had named it, but now it becomes real. A line of tanks, barbed wire, and silence stretching across Europe. In Germany, that line will one day rise in concrete, a wall that divides families, cities, and time itself. But in these years, the contest is not fought on battlefields. It is fought in ideas, in secrets, in skies. The world arms itself with bombs that can end everything. Men build weapons too powerful to use, yet too sacred to destroy. And both sides begin to dream of something higher, not the heavens of faith, but the heavens of science. The race for the future has begun. Rockets roar where angels once flew, and the world looks up, not in prayer, but in fear. In a secret base near Baikonur, Soviet engineers labor through nights of freezing wind and sparks of flame. Among them walks a quiet genius, Sergei Korolev, a man once imprisoned by Stalin, now designing humanity's path to the stars. He looks at the sky and says only, "We will reach it first." Soon the world will hear a new sound, a metal heartbeat echoing through space. Beep, beep, beep. Sputnik. 1. October 4th, 1957. The first satellite ever launched by mankind. The Soviet Union has touched the heavens. The world below will never be the same. For the first time in history, the narrator whispers, the Earth looked up and saw itself reflected in a Russian star. The year is 1958. From Washington to Moscow, the world no longer sleeps easy. Every hum of a radio, every streak of light in the sky feels like a possible warning or a promise. For mankind has reached the stars, but it has brought its fears with it. In the Soviet Union, factories buzz with secret purpose. Young engineers work under dim lamps, drawing lines that will change history. Missiles, not made for war but for wonder. And yet, always with war in their shadow. And then, a moment that will define a generation. April 12, 1961. From the Kazakh steppe, a single rocket stands trembling against the dawn. Inside, strapped and still, a young pilot whispers a prayer to the machine around him. Yuri Gagarin, a farm boy, a dreamer, a soldier of the stars. The engines ignite. Fire consumes the silence. The earth falls away. Poyakali, let's go. His voice crackles through radio waves, and with it, the Soviet Union touches eternity. For one orbit of the Earth, humanity itself transcends its boundaries. For 90 minutes, the blue planet becomes small, fragile, united, and breathtaking. Gagarin returns to a world forever changed. He smiles, waves, salutes. Everywhere, children paint his face, mothers weep, fathers stand taller. Russia has not just conquered space, it has conquered destiny. But victory carries a price. For in Washington, the shock is electric. The United States, caught off guard twice, first by Sputnik, now by Gagarin, vows it will never be second again. The race for the cosmos turns into a race for survival. While rockets climb higher, leaders trade threats like thunder. In Cuba, the embers of revolution burn bright. Fidel Castro, a bearded idealist, throws off America's shadow and turns to Moscow for protection. Khrushchev sees opportunity, a way to level the balance of fear. He sends missiles, hidden under crates of farm equipment, across the Atlantic to the island just 90 miles from Florida. The plan is bold, the risk apocalyptic. In October 1962, U.S. reconnaissance planes uncover the truth. Photographs show launch sites rising from Cuban soil. President John F. Kennedy demands their removal. The world holds its breath. For 13 days, the fate of humanity teeters between pride and destruction. In Moscow, Khrushchev paces. In Washington, Kennedy calculates. Two men, each convinced he defends peace, each trapped by the logic of fear. Submarines circle, bombers hover, nuclear codes wait in locked cases. And yet, No missile flies. Through secret letters, desperate back channels, and sheer human will, the two leaders step back from the edge. The missiles are withdrawn. The world exhales. For the first time, the narrator whispers, the human race learned how close it could come to ending itself, and still survive. But not without scars. Khrushchev, once triumphant, is now seen as reckless, both abroad and at home. His gamble had frightened even his allies, and though he avoided Armageddon, he also lost his aura of control. By 1964, his own comrades quietly remove him from power. No execution, no exile, just a phone call, a limousine, and a resignation speech. We will remember you, they say, but not your mistakes. In the years that follow, the laughter fades. The thaw turns to frost again. A new leader rises, Leonid Brezhnev. A man of order, discipline, and pride. He does not promise warmth, he promises stability. Under him, the Soviet Union becomes a fortress of routine. Parades fill Red Square with perfect symmetry. Factories hum with unending rhythm. The anthem echoes with unshakable certainty. To the outside world, it seems unbreakable, a steel giant stretching from Europe to the Pacific. But beneath the banners, something quiet begins to die. The dream that once reached the stars now drifts in orbit, untouched, unsustained. When revolutions grow old, the narrator murmurs, they forget how to dream. Power is a strange thing. It promises safety, but demands silence. It builds empires, but buries the soul beneath them. Under Leonid Brezhnev, the Soviet Union becomes an empire of mirrors. Everything appears strong, eternal, triumphant. Red banners ripple over new cities. Factories thunder day and night. The army gleams beneath parades of precision. But behind the steel and marble, the cracks begin to spread. The economy slows, the people grow weary, and the dream that once ignited revolutions turns into the machinery of habit. Brezhnev rules like a father who fears his children's questions. His speeches are long, his pace slow, his eyebrows like symbols of permanence. He smiles from portraits across the USSR. In schools, his name is praised. In whispers, it is mocked. The 1970s arrive. The Cold War stretches on like an endless chess match. Each move, cautious, expensive, exhausting. Nuclear arsenals grow, but no one dares to use them. Instead, both superpowers fight proxy wars, conflicts in faraway lands where ideals bleed quietly into mud. In Vietnam, American soldiers march through jungles while Moscow supplies weapons and dreams to their enemies. In Africa, revolutions rise with Soviet flags and Western dollars alike. And in Afghanistan, a storm begins to form, one that will haunt both empires in time. Each nation fights in shadows, claiming to defend freedom, justice, peace, yet each secretly mirrors the other's cruelty. The world became a stage, the narrator whispers, where both actors forgot what play they were performing. Inside the Soviet Union, life becomes predictable, safe, but stagnant. Every morning the same bread, the same cues, the same quiet acceptance. There is no starvation, but no inspiration. There is education, but no freedom. Censorship is everywhere, so subtle it feels invisible. People learn to speak in two voices, one for public, one for truth. In smoky kitchens, friends whisper forbidden music, forbidden jokes, and above every word hangs the invisible ear of the state. Meanwhile, Brezhnev expands Soviet influence abroad. Tanks roll into Czechoslovakia in 1968 to crush the Prague Spring, a movement that dared to ask for socialism with a human face. The message is clear. The empire allows reform, but only from above. From East Berlin to Budapest, the Iron Curtain grows thicker, and yet, under that silence, the human spirit quietly stirs. Writers smuggle truth into poems, painters hide meaning in colors, scientists push the boundaries of thought, even prisoners in Siberia whisper hope through frozen bars. One dissident, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, writes of the gulags, the empire's darkest secret. His words reach the West, earning him the Nobel Prize and exile. A single word of truth, he says, can outweigh the whole world. Brezhnev, now aging and weary, presides over a country that still looks powerful, but feels hollow. His generals smile, his ministers obey. But innovation dies, factories rust, and belief fades into bureaucracy. Even space, once the theater of glory, grows quiet. The United States walks on the moon, while the Soviet program stalls in secrecy and loss. Still, Brezhnev's speeches insist, our system is strong, our people are united, the future belongs to us. The crowds applaud, the band plays, and yet, in millions of Soviet homes, televisions flicker with weary eyes. We have everything, some whisper, except the reason why. By the late 1970s, the air itself feels heavy, like time refusing to move. Brezhnev's hands tremble as he signs new decrees. His words slur, his health fails, but no one dares remove him. Power has become its own ritual, unchanging, unquestioned, unalive. When he dies in 1982, the news anchors weep on cue. The nation mourns, sincerely, yet mechanically. And in the cold November rain, the Soviet Union buries not just a leader, but the illusion of eternal strength. The Iron Curtain still stood, but behind it the fire had begun to dim. Every empire believes it can outlast time, but time is patient. It waits, and when the moment comes, it whispers, and the walls begin to fall. 1979. Snow drifts over the mountains of Afghanistan, a land of dust, blood, and defiance. In Moscow, Soviet generals unfold maps. To them, it is a small war, a quick intervention to protect a friendly government, another pawn in the global chess game of ideology. They promise victory in weeks. It will last a decade. Columns of tanks cross the border. The red star glows against the white peaks. Helicopters circle villages that have never known the name communism. But the Afghans, fierce, tribal, ancient, refuse to be conquered. They fight from the mountains, from caves, from shadows. The Soviet soldiers, boys barely out of school, find themselves trapped in a war with no front lines, no glory, no escape. Back home, mothers wait for letters that never come. Coffins return without explanation. The government calls them advisors, but the people know better. The Soviet Union, once the giant of ideology, is bleeding in silence. And as the war drags on, the old empire begins to rot from within. Factories break down. Store shelves empty. Oil, once the lifeblood of the system, cannot fill the hunger for progress. Beneath the surface, whispers of rebellion grow louder. The same whispers that once built a revolution, now dream of escape. 3 men rule in quick succession after Brezhnev: Andropov, Chernenko, each old, each sick, each temporary. Their portraits hang, their funerals follow. The Soviet people, standing in endless black coats, begin to ask a forbidden question. Who will lead us into tomorrow? Then, in 1985, a new face emerges. Younger, sharper, restless. Mikhail Gorbachev. The world takes notice. So does history. He speaks of words not heard in decades: glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. They sound like fresh air in a stale room. We cannot live like this any longer, he declares. We must change, or we will perish. At first, people dare not believe. But change begins, real change. Censorship eases. Newspapers print truth. Artists speak freely. Citizens argue in public without fear. And once the door opens, the flood cannot be stopped. Across Eastern Europe, nations held captive behind the Iron Curtain begin to move, to breathe, to rise. In Poland, workers strike under banners of solidarity. In Hungary, the border to the west quietly opens. In East Germany, crowds fill the streets, chanting not for bread, but for freedom. And in November 1989, as cameras roll and the world holds its breath, the unthinkable happens. The Berlin Wall falls. For decades, it had stood as the symbol of division, the wound of the Cold War carved in concrete. Now, with hammers and bare hands, the people bring it down, stone by stone, tear by tear, 1,000 lights piercing the night. In Moscow, Gorbachev watches on television, half in pride, half in fear. He knows the tide cannot be stopped. Communist regimes crumble one by one. The Warsaw Pact dissolves. Soviet allies turn their backs. The empire that had stretched from Berlin to Vladivostok is unraveling before the eyes of its master. And within Russia itself, ancient wounds reopen. Ethnic tensions, economic collapse, republics demanding independence. The Red Star still flies, but the faith behind it has vanished. The Iron Curtain was not torn down by bombs, but by the quiet courage of ordinary souls who simply stopped being afraid. By 1991, the world that began in revolution ends in resignation. Mikhail Gorbachev steps before the cameras, his face lined not with defeat, but with truth. He announces the end of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Behind him, the red flag is lowered from the Kremlin. In its place, the old tricolor of Russia rises once more. Blue, white, red, a nation reborn, and yet uncertain what it means to live again. For 70 years, the narrator says, the world lived in the shadow of two suns, and when one went dark, the other burned alone. When giants fall, the ground trembles. But when the dust settles, what remains are people, searching through ruins for the meaning of their own names. December 1991, the Soviet Union, the world's largest country, the colossus of the 20th century, ceases to exist. 15 new nations rise from its remains. Each inherits fragments of its power and the ghosts of its mistakes. In Moscow, the Kremlin stands silent. The hammer and sickle is lowered. The tricolor flag of old Russia flutters once more against the winter sky. For the first time since the Tsars, Russia is no longer an empire. The 1990s arrive like an earthquake. Factories close. Salaries vanish. Savings evaporate overnight. Men who once built rockets and tanks now sell shoes in street markets. Teachers drive taxis. Doctors barter for food. The air that once carried the rhythm of parades now echoes with the cries of hunger and protest. It is chaos, freedom, and loss all at once. A nation unlearning fear, but also losing direction. The new president, Boris Yeltsin, stands before the crumbling parliament, promising democracy, prosperity, and a fresh start. He smiles like a man who believes his own hope. But beneath him, the system is drowning. Oligarchs, young, ruthless, and cunning, seize control of industries once owned by the state. Oil, gas, media, power, sold for pennies, bought by billionaires. The country's wealth condenses into a few hands, while millions struggle to survive. In the streets, the ruble collapses. Inflation devours savings. Old women sell family heirlooms for bread. Freedom, the narrator sighs, had come without a guide. Crime spreads. The black market becomes the real economy. Moscow turns into a city of shadows, of limousines and poverty side by side. The West celebrates the end of communism, but in the Russian heart it feels less like victory and more like betrayal. The army, once feared across continents, cannot pay its soldiers. The proud veterans of Afghanistan beg in train stations. The Red Star still shines on their caps, but the country it once defended no longer exists. In 1993, a new storm erupts, this time within Russia itself. Parliament rebels against Yeltsin's reforms. He orders tanks to fire on the very building that once symbolized the people's voice. The city burns, civilians flee, and as smoke curls over the Moskva River, the new Russia kills its own illusion of unity. Democracy, whispers the narrator, was baptized in fire and doubt. Yet amid the ruins, something stubborn survives, the Russian spirit. In small apartments, families light candles, drink tea, and speak of better days. Artists paint again. Musicians sing without fear. Writers question everything. And in the hearts of millions, one thought begins to form. We have fallen before, and we will rise again. As the decade closes, the nation stands at a crossroads, tired, wounded, but still breathing. Yeltsin, old and frail, appears on television one final time. It is New Year's Eve, 1999. He speaks softly, almost apologetically. I have done what I could, but many things did not work out. And then, in a gesture that stuns the world, he resigns. handing power to a young unknown successor. A man from the shadows of the security services, quiet, calculated, disciplined, Vladimir Putin. As midnight bells echo across the Kremlin, he steps forward to address the nation, his voice calm, his promise simple. Order will return. The cameras fade to black. A new century begins. And Russia, reborn from empire, scarred by freedom, haunted by memory, stands once more at the edge of destiny. The Iron Curtain has fallen, but its shadow still lingers, in borders, in hearts, in silence. For history does not end, it only changes its name. From the ashes of an empire, a phoenix rises, not in fire, but in frost. It does not sing, it watches, it waits, and when it moves, the world holds its breath. The year 2000, a new millennium dawns, and with it, a new ruler, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, little known, quiet, but with the unmistakable discipline of a man who understands the value of silence. Born in Leningrad, trained by the KGB, shaped by the chaos of the 1990s, he carries within him the hunger of a generation that saw their homeland humiliated and vows to never let it happen again. On television, his voice is calm, measured. He does not shout, he does not beg. He promises one word the people have long forgotten: stability. After years of collapse, that word feels like salvation. Terrorism grips the land, bombings in apartment blocks, blood in Moscow's streets, the Second Chechen War raging in the mountains. Putin, still new to power, moves with precision. He sends soldiers, tanks, and unflinching orders. No hesitation, no apology. Chechnya's cities burn once more. The rebels fight with fury. Civilians flee through ruins. It is brutal. It is decisive. And to many Russians, it feels like control returning. Television shows him visiting troops, meeting mothers of the fallen, walking through the rubble. He speaks softly, but the message is iron. We will not bow, not again. By 2002, the war is officially over, but the silence that follows is uneasy. The Chechen capital, Grozny, lies in ashes. The world condemns. Russia looks inward. The economy begins to stir again. Oil prices rise. Money returns. Cities gleam with new towers. The ruble steadies, and for the first time in a decade, hope feels tangible. Ordinary Russians, once broken by inflation, can now afford homes, cars, and vacations. They call it a miracle. And at its center, the man who made it happen. Putin's image fills the television screens, his approval near absolute. To some he is savior, to others a shadow in daylight. Power consolidates quietly. Independent media fade or are absorbed. Oligarchs who challenge the state, exiled, imprisoned, or destroyed. One by one, the pillars of the 1990s fall. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, once the richest man in Russia, arrested live on camera. His oil empire dismantled, his wealth reclaimed by the state. There will be no return to the chaos of the past, Putin says. Russia must be strong, or it will not be at all. And the people, weary of instability, agree. In 2005, during a televised address, Putin calls the fall of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. The phrase echoes across the world. Analysts shiver. Historians argue. But to millions of Russians, it sounds like truth. They remember lost borders, lost pride, lost certainty. They remember when the world feared them, and mistake that fear for respect. The phoenix has spread its wings, not to rebuild the past, but to reclaim its echo. The new Russia does not march. It advances like ice across the river, silent, steady, unstoppable. Abroad, Putin projects strength. At home, he builds order. Churches reopen. Military parades return. The anthem, once Soviet, is restored. Same melody, new words. A message to the world. The old empire is gone, but its heart still beats. And as the Kremlin lights glow over the Moscow River, the question returns, whispered across continents. Is this the rise of a new Russia, or the return of the old one? At first, the world applauds the calm, a nation recovering, a people rebuilding. But beneath the surface, the tide is shifting. and every tide, once it turns, hungers for the shore. The 2000s, a decade of rediscovery. Moscow shines with the glow of oil wealth. Luxury cars flood the streets that once knew hunger. New malls rise beside crumbling Soviet relics. The ruble grows strong, and the Kremlin grows confident. But in the corridors of power, one thought keeps returning. Russia had been humiliated once. It would not be humiliated again. 2008. The small nation of Georgia ignites the spark. A border conflict in South Ossetia and Abkhazia erupts into war. Russian tanks roll across the Caucasus. The world watches in shock as, within days, Georgian forces are crushed. In the Kremlin, Putin, now Prime Minister, with Dmitry Medvedev as the public face of power, observes in silence. It is his test and his warning. The message is unmistakable. Russia is back. As Western leaders debate and condemn, a new idea crystallizes in the Russian mind. That global order is a mask for Western control, that democracy itself is a weapon, that every revolution near Russia's borders is a threat wrapped in the flag of freedom. To Moscow, color revolutions in Ukraine, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan are not hope, but invasion by ideology. To Washington, they are liberation. To Russia, encirclement. Thus, the old Cold War begins to flicker again, not in arms, but in beliefs. At home, the rhythm of life changes. Nationalism rises quietly. The Orthodox Church, once persecuted, returns to the center of culture. Putin appears in cathedrals, crosses himself, and speaks of faith as destiny. Television fills with patriotic songs, military documentaries, and shows that speak of sacrifice, honor, and homeland. To many, it feels like pride reborn. To others, a dream of control wearing the clothes of unity. By 2010, the stage is set for another transformation. Putin returns to the presidency. The power never truly left him. He is older now, harder. The years have sharpened him like steel. He looks west and sees a Europe divided. He looks south and sees wars in the Middle East. He looks east, to China, and sees potential. And deep within the Kremlin walls, he begins to imagine something larger, a Eurasian rebirth, a Russia not of ideology, but of identity. But shadows accompany rebirth. Journalists disappear. Opposition figures are silenced. Among them, Anna Politkovskaya, a voice for the voiceless in Chechnya, shot in her Moscow apartment building on Putin's birthday. The message, never official, always clear. Then comes Alexander Litvinenko, a former FSB officer poisoned in London with radioactive polonium. A death that shocks the world, a ghost of Cold War tactics returning in modern form. The Kremlin denies involvement. The West investigates. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between denial and fear. Power speaks softly, because it no longer needs to shout. When a nation regains its breath, the first sound it makes is not laughter, but the exhale of memory. By now, Putin is more than a man. He is symbol. For millions, the embodiment of Russian strength, uncompromising, direct, unyielding. For others, a shadow over freedom. The duality defines the age. Some see him restoring dignity. Others see him resurrecting fear. Both are true. Then, in 2014, the world changes again. In Ukraine, protests fill the streets of Kyiv. The president, loyal to Moscow, flees the capital. Chaos follows. And in the Black Sea, Russian troops, unmarked, silent, begin to move. The world holds its breath. Crimea is taken, swiftly, bloodlessly, almost surgically. In a speech to thunderous applause, Putin declares it the return of Crimea to its rightful home. The people cheer. The world condemns. Sanctions fall. But inside Russia, approval soars. For the first time in decades, Russians feel they have taken something back. It was not land alone that was reclaimed. It was pride. It was memory. It was the belief that Russia could shape history again. Every empire reborn must test its strength, not by peace, but by the echo of challenge. And in that echo, the world begins to tremble once more. 2014 to 2016. The world changes faster than it can understand itself. Crimea's annexation redraws maps, and with it, the invisible boundaries of trust. In Western capitals, outrage. In Russian homes, pride. The television shows celebration. Fireworks over Sevastopol, flags raised, hymns echoing through the streets. But behind the music, a line has been crossed that will not be uncrossed. Sanctions descend like winter snow. Banks freeze. Currency tumbles. Foreign companies leave. But within Russia, the effect is strangely galvanizing. The West calls it punishment. The Kremlin calls it purification. Propaganda? Perhaps. But for a people forged in hardship, adversity feels familiar, almost comfortable. And so, a new slogan spreads. They can't isolate us. We will stand alone. That same year, a new front opens, not in Europe, but in the sands of Syria. Russia enters the war to defend Bashar al-Assad, and with that single move, reclaims a seat at the global table. Jet engines scream over Damascus skies. Missiles arc through desert night. For the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russian forces fight outside their borders, not in retreat, but in command. Western critics condemn the civilian toll, but in Moscow, the message plays differently. Russia has returned to greatness. The phoenix spreads its wings. At home, power tightens. Laws change. Opposition dwindles. Television becomes choir. Elections still happen, but their outcomes are no longer mysteries. The state narrative grows stronger, weaving patriotism with fear. Enemies are everywhere. Foreign agents, spies, dissenters. And yet, the streets are calm. Order prevails. After the chaos of the 1990s, stability feels sacred, even when it comes at a price. In 2016, the world stares in disbelief as reports emerge of Russian interference in the U.S. elections. Cyber warfare, the new battlefield of the 21st century. Hackers, bots, and hidden networks, invisible soldiers waging silent war. No armies cross borders, but minds are invaded instead. The Cold War has returned, not with missiles, but with code. Empires of the past sought to conquer land. Empires of today seek to conquer perception. And yet, inside Russia, the rhythm of life continues. New highways, new stadiums. The 2018 World Cup, a spectacle of pride and perfection. Smiling volunteers, glowing stadium lights, an illusion of peace broadcast to billions. But behind the bright banners, the shadow deepens. The assassination of Boris Nemtsov, shot near the Kremlin walls. The poisoning of Sergei Skripal in Britain. Patterns emerge, but denial remains absolute. Each incident another quiet reminder that dissent carries a price. By now, Putin's image is mythic. Riding horses, diving into icy waters, piloting planes, embodying not just a leader, but an idea. A man fused with the state itself. The line between symbol and reality blurs, until they are indistinguishable. Meanwhile, the West grows divided. Brexit fractures Europe, America turns inward, and Russia, from afar, watches the storm unfold, patient, calculating, as though destiny has merely taken a pause to let history catch up. In every century, there comes a moment when silence is mistaken for peace. But Russia knows better, for its silence is only the drawing of breath before the next storm. Every century writes a line that defines it, some with ink, some with fire. And when Russia wrote its line, the world trembled beneath the pen. February 2022, winter in Ukraine. Snow drifts over empty fields, tanks idling on the border, their engines rumbling like a heartbeat too loud to ignore. For weeks, the world had watched. Negotiations, warnings, calls for peace. But in the early hours of February 24th, the silence shattered. Missiles lit the sky over Kiev. Columns of troops crossed the border. The invasion had begun. Putin called it a special military operation. The world called it war. Cities fell silent under air raid sirens. Families huddled in subway tunnels. Children clutched toys and blankets. The 21st century, supposedly the age of reason, had awoken to the echoes of the 20th. Kyiv stood defiant. President Zelensky refused to flee. He filmed himself in the capital saying, "I am here, we are all here." And across the world, screens flickered with disbelief. It was not just a war of bullets, but of images, of truth and propaganda, of narrative and nationhood. In Russia, the story was different. Television showed liberation, not invasion. Soldiers were hailed as heroes. Critics were silenced overnight. Thousands of protesters filled the streets and were arrested within hours. Independent news outlets vanished. Words like war and invasion became forbidden. In a single stroke, the clock turned backward, decades, perhaps centuries. Sanctions struck with devastating force. Banks cut off, airlines grounded, corporations fled. The ruble crashed, then recovered through strict control. But something deeper broke. Isolation returned. Young Russians fled abroad in droves, carrying with them laptops, dreams, and the quiet ache of displacement. Families divided, those who believed the state and those who no longer could. Truth became contraband, whispers one exiled journalist, and hope, a foreign word. On the battlefield, the war grew darker. Towns like Bucha, Mariupol, names once unknown to most of the world, became symbols of suffering. Ukraine fought with courage that surprised even its allies. Russia, vast and relentless, found itself mired in resistance. Tens of thousands dead, millions displaced. Europe, once comfortable, suddenly felt the cold breath of history again. This was not a new chapter. It was an old one, torn from the past and rewritten in modern blood. As the months dragged on, Russia turned inward once more. The Kremlin tightened its grip. Censorship hardened. Patriotism became survival. Men were drafted, some willing, most not. Mothers wept as trains carried their sons east and west, to lands they'd never seen. Yet through all this, the official story never wavered. Russia was not at war, it was defending itself. From a hostile West, from betrayal, from the ghosts of the Soviet collapse. The narrative that began in the ashes of the 1990s had come full circle. By late 2022, Moscow stood defiant, but weary. The glow of unity dimmed, replaced by exhaustion and quiet grief. And still, the war continued, in cafes, whispers, in universities, empty seats. In the eyes of the young, questions their elders no longer dared to ask aloud. What future awaited them? What world would rise from this storm? Empires fall not when they are defeated, but when their people stop believing the story. By 2023, sanctions bite deeper. Inflation grows. The old alliances fracture. China draws closer. Europe arms itself again. And in the shadow of war, Russia becomes once more what it has always been. A riddle written in pain and power, half proud, half haunted. The phoenix that once rose from frost now circles the fire of its own making. It does not fall. It does not fly away. It lingers, waiting for the next century to decide its fate. History does not end. It circles back. Like the slow turn of the Volga, it bends through sorrow and triumph and finds its way home again. 1,000 years have passed. From the wooden walls of Novgorod to the glass towers of Moscow City, the story of Russia has never been still. It is the story of a people who built kingdoms in the cold and carried faith across fire. Of poets who whispered truth beneath tyranny, of mothers who buried sons in foreign soil, and of rulers who believed they could shape eternity. Every age of Russia begins with hope and ends with endurance. From princes to revolutionaries, from comrades to presidents, one thread never breaks: the belief that pain is the price of greatness. Look back to Ivan the Terrible, whose fear forged the first empire, to Peter the Great, who opened the window to the West, to Catherine, who made Russia an empire of elegance and ambition, to Nicholas, whose crown fell under red banners, to Lenin, whose dream built a world, to Stalin, whose shadow stretched across generations, and to Putin, who turned the page once more. From the ashes of collapse to the uncertainty of power reborn. Each name a chapter, each chapter a wound, each wound a lesson written in snow and silence. Russia, the eternal contradiction, a land that fears chaos but worships strength, that longs for freedom yet trusts only order, that remembers suffering more deeply than joy. In the West, history is argument. In Russia, it is confession. Stand in Red Square on a winter's night. The bells of St. Basil's echo through the frost. The Kremlin walls glow red against the snow. Each brick whispers names, forgotten peasants, fallen soldiers, exiled poets. They are all here. They have always been here. Russia's story is not one of victory or defeat. It is of survival. The stubborn refusal to vanish. Empires around her have risen and fallen. The Mongols, the Ottomans, the British. But Russia endures. It breaks, it bleeds, it burns, and still it remains. Perhaps that is her greatest secret. Not conquest, not wealth, but persistence. And yet, the future is uncertain. The same questions that haunted the Tsars and taunted the revolutionaries linger still. Who are we? What are we willing to become? How much can we sacrifice for the idea of Russia? Before we lose the people who make it real, nations are not built by victories. They are built by memory. And memory once lit never truly dies. Somewhere in Siberia, the aurora dances above frozen rivers. In St. Petersburg, the canals freeze into mirrors. In Moscow, the eternal flame still burns for soldiers long gone. And in the hearts of millions, a quiet prayer. For peace, for dignity, for a home that no longer fears its own reflection. Perhaps one day the phoenix will rest. Not in pride, but in understanding. Not in shadow, but in light. Until then, Russia waits. A nation of paradoxes, half myth, half memory, forever caught between heaven and earth. This is Russia, the empire that never truly dies, only changes its name. Its history is not a straight line, but a heartbeat, pulsing through centuries, steady and unbroken. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it, beneath the snow, beneath the silence, still beating.